Good morning. Welcome to the Point. If you have been following along here, you know we've been talking a lot about auto no-fault insurance reform because that's what they're working on in Lansing. And this past week, a committee passed out a bill that could go to the full House, but not everybody is on board, including my first guest this morning, Representative Chris Afendoulis. We talked to the representative about NoFault, but first about a water quality problem in part of an area that he represents in north central Kent County. We've heard about contamination in wells around Rockford and other places. We asked him about that first. Representative, let's start talking about a subject that we've talked a lot about here, 24 Hour News 8, and that is contamination in some wells in the district that you represent. Representative Verheulen and I talked about it earlier in this week. I talked with Senator McGregor about it. This is something that has developed pretty rapidly, and I know you've met with DEQ and a lot of the interested parties. Where are we as this process moves forward?
I think, Rick, obviously the waste that was dumped was, 40 and 50 years ago. So it's kind of a mystery. You're trying to figure out what happened where. There's a lot of sites supposedly. We heard of one near a school in Cannon Township, near one of the Rockford School District schools. Fortunately, it was none of these chemical waste. It was construction waste, and we found they did the testing. There's nothing in the school well, so that's good. I mean, that's a positive thing. But yeah, we're trying to make sure that we understand, first and foremost, people are getting water that need to get water, and it's clean. They're getting bottled water. I think Wolverine has done a good job responding in this way, making sure that I think they're acting, at least in my view, as a good corporate citizen. But what we need to now make sure is, what's the long-term solution going to be? And we're still trying to determine exactly the scope of the problem. So Representative Verheulen and I, Senator McGregor, regular meetings. Our staff are having a lot of meetings. We're making sure we're meeting with local municipal officials, the DEQ. We've met with Wolverine, talked to them about it. I think we always have to be cautious about where things are headed, but I think that the right steps are being taken. The DEQ is on this every step of the way. My understanding is from Wolverine and the DEQ is they're in communication several times a day. So I think first and foremost, though, make sure people have safe drinking water. They've expanded the testing of these wells. It's a very, very low 70 parts per trillion on these PFAS substances. Normal water tests can't even detect this stuff. And so we've actually asked the administration, Governor Snyder's administration, to be ready to do whatever they need to do in terms of, do we need to update some testing equipment that the state has, which they actually are in process of doing that at the DHHS labs. And so we're doing everything we can and just trying to stay on top of the issue and make sure that the right things are being done for the residents.
We, of course, will stay in touch with you about that, but I really invited you here to talk about auto no-fault insurance reform.
Yes.
And if you look at the system that we have in the state, we have an unlimited payout when it comes to catastrophic care. It's
Yes.
the most generous in the country. We pay some of the highest rates in the country. You and your colleagues have talked for a long time, and those who came before you have talked about doing something about the rate structure, about the fee structure, about fraud, about all of these things. In this past week, over in the House, the Insurance Committee kicked out a bill with an amendment that says there are a lot of components. I'm going to give you the thumbnail sketch. You correct me if I'm wrong. That there would be 3 separate levels that you could buy coverage for your personal injury protection. The current unlimited, a $500,000 cap and a $250,000 cap. The amendment that was passed that helped to get that bill out of committee says that if you buy at the unlimited, you would get a 10% rate reduction. At the $500,000, you get a 20% rate reduction. And if you bought at the $250,000 limit, you would get a 40% rate reduction in the personal injury protection, or PIP, part of the plan, not in the collision part.
Correct.
So in about 45% of the cost of the insurance, in some cases, you would get a 40, 20, or 10% discount. Is that more or less what it looks like on paper?
Yeah, I think so. I think I would just say, look, if you get a telephone poll and they say, Rick, do you think your insurance rates are too high? Yes. Do you think that you'd like to get a reduction? Sure. You'd answer that question for most things that you buy, right? The thing that I think people need to make sure they're understanding is, if indeed this becomes law, what are you giving up? Because if you go down to this $250,000 choice, there's a couple really interesting components of that. You split it up. I'm a CPA, so bear with me. You split that up. The way it's split up in the law is $225,000 of that $250,000 is for emergency care. $25,000 is for post-acute care. So if you rack up $150,000 of the $225,000, that $75,000 that's left over can't get transferred. It's only $25,000 of post-acute, and that's where people need care if they have to have home care, if they have to have rehabilitation care. It's going to have a limit. Then it would kick into other insurance if you have it. Now, what does that mean? It could go to Medicaid, it could go to Medicaid expansion, or private insurers. But people need to remember not everything is covered. Where seniors are concerned, and this is an area that they're saying, well, you can go on Medicare instead of auto NoFault. Our seniors need to remember one thing, and I'm not going to say that they're clearly intelligent and sharp enough to make these decisions. However, they need to know that Medicare does not cover long-term care or attendant care in your home if you have an accident. Auto NoFault does. When you go to the hospital, it'll cover your hospital, but you'll have a daily copay, and that copay will go up after 30 days. And then if you don't have the resources beyond the insurance, you have to start spending down your own assets for that care. And then eventually, if you want to have care then paid for, because Medicare doesn't pay for it, you'd have to go on Medicaid, which increases the state's expense, and I don't think is the same level of care. So that's a really important point, I think. But you characterize it correctly. The interesting thing about the savings. So let's say, and I think you're absolutely right. This is only on your personal injury protection component of your insurance. Now, mine, including the getting into too many acronyms, the Michigan Catastrophic Claims Fund, we all pay $170 a year for that. No matter who you are, what policy you have, per car, that's what you pay. So that's included in your personal injury protection. Now, when I think about that, I say, well, if my PIP, let's say, is $1,000, and we're being promised, now it's not a guarantee, it's not guaranteed, it's a promise of 40%. Insurers do have an out if they can't, they have an opportunity to go to the insurance commissioner and say, well, we just can't do it, it's too much of a financial stress on our company, and the insurance commissioner can say, okay, you don't have to do that. However, so let's go back to the example, $1,000, $400 PIP reduction. Well, as part of the your PIP insurance is that MCCA fee. You'd get a reduction of $130 for each car. Let's say you have two cars. Or, I'm sorry, one car. $130 of this $400 is the MCCA fee that you're not going to pay anymore because you're not going to get into the catastrophic pool if you have that accident. Well, they're counting that as part of what the insurance company is going to give you in a premium reduction. I always look at it this way. If you're getting less, you should be paying less. So are you really getting a discount? I think that's an important distinction.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the politics of this, because there are 41, 2, 3, maybe, Republican colleagues of yours that, at last check, were more or less on board. And that leaves another 19, 18, however many 20, Republicans
21, whatever it might be, right?
Yeah, who aren't. And I talked this past week with the Democratic leader. He was not terribly enthusiastic about this plan, which means getting 15 Democrats or 18 or whatever it takes to backfill could be difficult too. So what is it that is the possible when it comes to no-fault reform, if it isn't this plan, which you seem to be less than enthusiastic about as well? Right. What is it?
Where could we go?
That could happen, because this is a conversation that's gone on for decades.
Well, it's interesting. I think that there's no question there is a belief that we should have a fraud authority to root out fraud in the system. The one thing I will point out, the fraud authority that's in this bill is a one way. It only says that doctors and healthcare providers could be committing fraud. I think you have to broaden that, and you have to have it more equal. That's what Representative Joe Graves' bill does. I think that you could look at some attendant care. That's where family attendant care, where it would limit it to, in this case, 56 hours a week for a family getting paid to care for a family member. That's something that I think people can agree on. I think that we can also agree on, we have something called 7-day insurance. Now, it's technically not legal to buy a policy for 7 days. What people do is they buy like a 30-day policy, or they buy a policy, they give a down payment on the policy, they go to the Secretary of State, they get their tags, they cancel their insurance. So that's something that I think needs to be addressed. One of the things you could do there is say we're going to collect that MCCA fee up front. First payment for everybody. Let's say you and I finance our insurance once a month. We make a payment for our auto insurance. In that first payment we make, we should have to pay the MCCA fee. That would help the MCCA become more solvent. I mean, they say it's in a deficit position. We really can't know that completely because we don't have full transparency. And I think that's another area, MCCA transparency of how all the estimates are being made to come up with the balance. That fund has $20 billion in it. $20 billion, that's a lot of money. And on a cash flow basis, I know I'm getting into the accounting again here, but on a cash flow basis, it has positive cash flow every single year. So I think those are some of the things that we could do.
Is this something that gets done? I mean, do we get to that? Because there are only a handful of days, realistically, in session. By the time you take a break for Thanksgiving and come back for 2 or 3 weeks in December, by the end of the year, it seems like a big heavy lift to try to get either this bill forwarded through the House, and if it gets to the Senate, let's face it, it's going to face a big uphill climb down there because the Senate majority leaders already said not terribly interested. The Senate in lame duck passed some of the things you just described, sent them over to the House, and the House was no thanks. So is this really something that can get done?
I think it would be difficult, but I would also say that I think people really do. I think there's a bipartisan support for the current system, but there is bipartisan support that it needs to have some changes. And I think that if we could get beyond just looking at one bill, there's 23 other pieces of legislation that have been proposed and assigned to the Insurance Committee. 6 introduced by Democrats, 17 introduced by Republicans, and I hope, and maybe we'll see some hearings on that from the chair. But I think when I look back at that bill at the end of last term, I think that the timing of it and the way it came down was just a little bit unsettling for some people in the House. As I look back on it, I think that might be a compromise that we could live with.
So what is the fate of NoFault? Well, there aren't that many days left in session this year, and it's not exactly clear that they'll be able to pull enough votes together to put it on the floor of the House. If they do, it goes to the Senate, and there, the future is even more uncertain. We'll continue to follow, and we'll have more To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. You know, we've already been talking to any number of people who are running for office in 2018. One of the big offices up for grabs will be governor. This morning, we introduce you to a non-politician, a Republican physician who says he wants to be the next governor of the state of Michigan, Dr. Jim Hines. Dr. Hines, I'm going to get to the why and what you would want to do, but can you tell me a little bit about your background first? Because for a lot of folks, and I know you've been out meeting a lot of people in some very retail politics, but on the more wholesale level, there may not be a broad knowledge of who you are in some parts. So tell me who you are.
Sure, Rick. Thank you so much for having me on Wood TV. I'm Dr. Jim Hines, and I have delivered thousands of babies, believe it or not. Morning, noon, and night, I have delivered, less than 10,000, I would guess. I'm married. I have a wife. We've been married for 43 years. We have 7 sons, 13 grandchildren, and we served as medical missionaries in the Central African Republic for 4 years, where I ran 2 hospitals. I'm not an airline, but an airplane pilot. I love to run races, a long-distance runner. I'm a hunter. I'm a 4th degree black belt, and I'm a physician, a medical doctor. But the one thing that I'm not is I'm not a politician. I've never run for political office ever before. I would be considered an outsider. And I'm a small business owner. I practice in Saginaw, and I've been one of the owners for about 21 years. So we have 45 employees. We deliver about 1,400 babies every year. I'm a teacher. I'm on staff for Central Michigan University, and was on the staff for Michigan State University for 17 years.
If you will pardon my cynicism, if a person picked up that bio and read it, they'd say, what the heck do you want to run for governor for? Because you've got a pretty good deal going the way it is. So what does it take? I mean, we've seen this in the past. People who are successful have careers away from politics, and then they say, I'm going to do this. And this is not an easy thing. The campaign is not easy. The job is not easy should you be successful in a little over a year. So what motivated you to get into this race?
Well, first of all, I'm concerned about the state of Michigan. I'm concerned about my family. I have 5 sons who are married they have the 13 grandchildren and not a one of them lives in the state of Michigan. That should tell Michiganders that we have an issue, and we do have an issue because our graduates are leaving the state. And you're right, I have been very successful as a medical doctor, a missionary. I've led many teams, medical teams overseas. But it wasn't until March of 2015 when I read something that one of our founding fathers wrote, Thomas Jefferson wrote in 1779. And he said that the greatest threat to America would be when the best qualified people refused to run for political office because it was too hard, too arduous, or too time-consuming, and that was me. I have two brothers who are veterans, and they said, Jim, you know, things are falling apart, and here you are traveling all over the world doing all kinds of things. The freedoms that we enjoy, they cost the lives of men and women. And we're going to lose that. You need to get involved. And that was the beginning of where we are right now.
Well, talk to me first about the problem with graduates leaving Michigan. There are more than 100,000 job openings in this state right now. So some of those most certainly would be applicable for folks with degrees. There are many of them that are skilled trades. We know that too. But so why aren't people staying here from your perspective?
You know, about half of our graduates, well, actually, they're not graduating. So 50% of college, those that start as a freshman by 6 years, haven't graduated. They don't have a degree. And many of them find out that really they had skill in the skilled trade area. And so they switch. So they end up doing things that they didn't do or they didn't study and prepare to do. It's hard to know. When you talk to these graduates, when you talk to my sons, some of them just couldn't find a job. And so they went elsewhere, or they couldn't find a job in the area that interested them. So one went to Washington, one went to Florida. I have one in Tennessee, two in Ohio. And when you speak to them, just from personal experience, they say, well, Dad, we love Michigan, but you know, we like the weather, we like this, or the job opportunity was too good to pass up.
Well, I identify with that. I've got a little while before my boys have to make those decisions, but I hear a lot about people who say they want their families to stay close. And I know what happened in the mid-2000s, the early 2000s. Mm-hmm. People fled the state in a wholesale manner, and it was understandable because it was called survival. But if you look at the economy today, is there something fundamentally wrong with what we're doing at the state level? I guess what I'm trying to get to is, how do we change that if we want to keep folks here?
Well, if we just talk about skilled trade, for example, for the last decade, we've been pushing everybody into college. We have not had adequate counseling in high schools. Everybody is being pushed to college. And a large percentage of those kids need remedial classes. I have professors that are my patients and say, you know, wow, this freshman class is really bad. Half of the classes in remedial education, remedial classes. So they're not prepared, they're not ready. So you know, that's just a huge issue when you're pushing people to college that should not be in college. And we need to build up and foster just the idea of being a skilled tradesperson, whether you're a plumber or electrician. There's honor in having that job. There's a good income that you can provide for your family. And so that is to me, that's a fundamental issue that we have. And the second one is not preparing kids. I mean, we have a large percentage of our 3rd and 4th graders that can't read. And if you can't read, then you can't educate yourself. And if you're even in skilled trades, you have to know how to add and subtract and use a ruler and so forth. And so these things are being missed.
When you talk about education in general, much of that falls on the shoulders of the state, at least from a financial standpoint. And I think there would be people that would argue that the education itself should be done more at the local level. But no matter how you look at it, the way it's set up in this state, the dollars and cents flow back from Lansing. What is your take on that? What should we be doing then to get those 3rd and 4th graders to be able to read if it's at least partially up to Lansing?
I think we need to go back to the basics. Math, reading, and allow teachers to teach. They should not be teaching to a test. Common Core causes teachers to do that. And the teachers that I have, they're having to do that. They're having to teach to a test, and they're not teaching what they would like to teach, what they think the students need to teach. We need to start even pre-K, working with kids, reading to them, having individuals come into the classroom. It doesn't have to be a certified teacher, but just workers, helpers, parents coming and assisting teachers, especially in those early grades. So critically important.
When you think about serving as governor of the state of Michigan, and I know this is the campaign and this is the primary, and so it's very early stages, what is your basic understanding of how Lansing works? Because I think it is, for many people, a very unusual animal. I mean, government is government, but there are a lot of institutional things built in, cooked in, if you will, to the whole process. What is your take on being governor? What does that look like?
Well, first of all, there's a lot of bureaucracy in Lansing, and we have 3 branches, and they need to function like our Constitution requires them to function to get things done. And governor has veto power. The governor has a bully pulpit, but more than that, the governor can display leadership, values, concerns, problems that need to be addressed to the legislature, who are going to write the laws and so forth. And so there has to be that give and take relationship. The governor is the governor of the whole state, not just of the Republicans, not just of the Democrats, but the whole state, for everybody. And we want to put people first and not politics. And so what that means is that when decisions need to be made in departments and agencies, that we're actually trying to avoid the bureaucracy. We're trying to keep regulations under control so that we can really put people first and not the politics. And so that is a fundamental change, because what I see politicians doing so often is they put the interests of their special interest groups, finances, relationships with other people, not necessarily regular grassroots people of the state first, but they put those interests first before the people. And we have to put people first to get done what needs to be done.
That is an argument that any number of politicians or non-politicians might well make. But it's particularly interesting coming from your standpoint, running as a Republican for the primary, for governor, saying that many times what happens is special interests that get the most attention. So what you're saying is that your majority party in the House and the Senate, and they've had the governor's office for the past almost 7 years, you feel like they aren't putting people first?
What I'm saying is what Ronald Reagan said years ago when he said putting people first is America's secret weapon, because it causes us, you, me, it spurs us, it pushes us to dream and to dare and to take great risks. And to dream about what you can do or what you could do, and then to actually dare to do it, and then to take the risk, often a financial risk, a time risk, to accomplish things. And so when the government grows and becomes bloated and big, it's taking a lot of that away from the people. And what I'm calling for is a limited government, turning things back over to the state, turning things back over to families and communities and people, and allowing that type of free market competition to happen and to get government out of the way.
As always, it's important to point out that many of the people that we have talked to will make the ballot next year, but some may not. We'll continue to keep an eye on that. When the filing deadline comes up next spring, we'll let you know, and of course, follow it all the way through the primary and right through decision 2018. And we're back with more To the Point. We'll be back in Lansing this week following NoFault and what else the legislature is doing. We'll see you next Sunday morning for To the Point.